The Constitutional Court is currently considering a case involving two husbands who seek to adopt their wives' surnames. So that challenging a specific section of the Deaths and Births Registration Act. So this legal bid is unopposed, indicating a potential shift in the judicial perspective on surname adoption. So the case not only addresses legal validity, but also raises important questions regarding social norms, traditional practices, and concepts of masculinity. So the outcome may have a significant implication for gender equality and the evolving understanding of identity within marriages. I want to chat a bit about this. I found this very interesting when my colleague Kani Mapanga was covering the story for us a little bit earlier on this week. But let's chat a bit about this now. We're joined by Phiwokuhle Mathenjwa, who's a family law expert, and Not in My Name President Siyabulela Jentile. They're joining us now for this conversation. To you both, thank you so much for joining us today. So I was quite fascinated, when I was listening to my colleague Kani Mapanga report on this story. But I think let's start here. So this is not mandatory. What we're basically looking at here is a right to choice, isn't it? Yeah, Mr. Jentile, you can go first. Thank you. You can go first.
Thank you. Good morning to you and the viewers back home. It is very interesting, as you said. I was just thinking about how I was attacked and Tukwa Upper last year when we were having this discussion just after the ruling. You are right to say that this is not necessarily saying that it will be mandatory for husbands to take the surnames of the wives after marriage. It is a provision in law which makes an allowance for those who would otherwise wish to do it. And we are in a constitutional democracy which constantly evolves. The masculinities you referred to earlier, they are not static. They are dynamic, they change. Our worldview changes all the time. And what we had known to be culture and tradition a few years ago sometimes is altered by future happenings, by current happenings. And so for me, at the bottom of all these things that are happening is choice. This is the law making an allowance for people who may choose to do this, to do it. And it does not necessarily mean now that everyone who gets married from henceforth will have to take the surname of the wife.
Yes.
I think, yes.
Yes. Ms. Mathenjwa, I mean, from a cultural perspective, and I don't know if I'm going to get into trouble for this, but, in the newsroom before we went to air this morning, I said to myself, in the kind of society that we live in, and because we are such cultural beings, I can almost hear someone say, and I would agree with you there, Mr. Jentile, if somebody would say, and tata ifani yomfazi. You are likely to hear that conversation. In homes elsewhere, if that conversation is already not being had. But this is very unique in this case because these are two white couples, I understand. So the issue perhaps maybe of culture may not be an issue of discussion, but, in African culture, in the black home, our needs would be different in this instance. Doesn't this broaden our conversation, in terms of where does culture come into all of this? Because we cannot discount the fact that exactly like Mr. Jentile said, you'd come under attack where you would have, certain quarters that will still say that there's simply no way I'm going to take, the surname of my wife and tata ifani yomfazi, just to, translate that a bit.
Good morning to you, Mandisa, and the viewers at home. As Siyabulela has answered, this is a matter of choice that we need to understand. And when we are going to refer to culture, are we saying one culture is better than the other? Because we need to keep in mind that we are all equal before the law. So this came as being discriminatory against men, in that if the systems of home affairs only allows for women to be able to change their surnames, where does it put then men? So that is why the Free State High Court had declared it unconstitutional, because it was now perpetuating gender inequalities. So it doesn't that much have any effect on culture. Remember, before this order, men were allowed to bring an application, but that application in terms of Section 26 could only be brought to the Director General. And someone had to show good reasons why they should be allowed to change their surnames. It was allowed when one has got a high-profile surname, and then they can keep their wives. But now, if a man is married to a man, what does that say? Does it mean that this man cannot assume his husband's surname? So that is what this is trying to address. And I do see a likelihood that they are going to win this case. Remember, one, it's unopposed. Two, they've also made an undertaking that they will abide. And if there is a court order, the Free State High Court had also ordered that Parliament has got 2 years to amend the Birth and Death Registration Act.
Yeah, but Ms. Mathenjwa, I think also, does this speak to the progression of our laws? You know, a lot of legislation perhaps that needs to be changed or corrected, or others might even say outdated, to accommodate exactly what you're saying. The issue of equality is something that is enshrined in our Constitution.
That's correct. We need to look at all of those things holistically. That is why, remember, court can only give an order in how it should happen, but it cannot direct the Parliament in respect of amending those laws. So we need to look at all those things holistically, as we have said, gender inequalities, and why exactly, if we are in this.
All right, I think we might seem to have had a problem there, Ms. Mathenjwa. Were you continuing?
No, I'm done. But what is important is that we just need to look at all these challenges holistically so that we are able to be the country that we are striving to be in taking into account our laws.
Absolutely. Mr. Jentile, I think, from your perspective, does this challenge, traditional gender roles and expectations? I would tend to agree with Ms. Mathenjwa, on the issue of our laws, the progression of our laws, to look exactly like what the Constitution says it should be in terms of equality. But of course, there is still that traditional gender setting that you're going to find, perhaps not in Johannesburg, but somewhere in the rural villages where people like myself come from.
Yes, of course. And it's interesting that you asked this question. Last Thursday, I was a panelist at UNESCO in one of the discussions, the headquarters in Paris, around men and masculinities. And we spoke at length about this. And as I said earlier, that this speaks to how we view our perceptions on masculinities. And as I said, that they are dynamic and they're constantly changing. And when you have rulings like this or law amendments such as this, they are definitely challenging masculinities. But what we need to ask ourselves is betterment of the society or not. And in this instance, it is for the betterment of society. It is to advance equality. It is to challenge harmful social norms that one gender above of the other. And just to be clear, because opinion took again, personally, this is not something I would advocate for. But I believe that as a nation, we are a nation of constitutional democracy that allows for the rights of others. As long as they don't trample or infringe on the rights of others, I don't see a problem with this. And so we need to constantly challenge masculinities. We need to constantly break them and reconstruct them such that they can be less harmful, they can be positive, and ensure that, we ultimately achieve gender equality that we have been preaching in our. So like Ms. Mathenjwa, I also don't see I also believe that this will be successful, as it is not opposed and all that. But also because a lot of South Africans genuinely believe that this is the way to go. And lastly, they must go and change their surnames now to take the wife. Only saying that those who wish to do, the law can finally allow them to do it. And that takes away nothing from our masculinities. It does not make us any less men. If you choose to do it, do it. If you choose not to do it, then don't do it. Life goes on.
Absolutely, and that's where we started our discussion this morning. Thank you very much to both of you for engaging in this discussion with us this morning. Of course, we did say it's not mandatory. It's more about a choice of individuals. Thank you very much indeed. We do appreciate your time. All right.